Okay, it's fantastic to be here at the Africa Tech Virtual Festival. We are having a panel here, and the topic is specifically looking at addressing hurdles to AI adoption in Africa. And I'm happy to be here. I'm Jacques Ludik. I'm the founder and president of the Machine Intelligence Institute of Africa. I'm also the founder and CEO of Cortex Group, as well as Cortex Logic, which is AI business, and we're focused on wellness. We're building scalable platform business around wellness. I'm very happy to be joined by my two esteemed colleagues. The first one is Otilia, and she's a lead attorney, emerging markets, Middle East and Africa at Microsoft. So I'm looking forward to her perspectives on what we're going to discuss today. And then we also have Aretha Marie here. She's doing a number of things, but specifically representing the Alliance for African Intelligence here. And she's the Policy and Ethics Chair. So great to have you with us here. So maybe just want to do each one just a quick introduction, tell a little bit more about just yourself before we get into the topics. So Otilia, let's quickly start with you.
Many thanks, Jacques. So I'm originally from Zimbabwe. I studied in South Africa, spent some time in the Middle East and the UAE about a decade before moving out to Nairobi 3 years ago. I have been with Microsoft maybe about 6-7 years. I'm at the core, I'm a commercial lawyer, but over time, because of the nature of the work and what Microsoft does, I've become a technology and really have spent a lot of time engaging both our customers, who are private and public sector, on issues around regulatory compliance when it comes to using emerging technologies, and then also engaging regulators as they develop policies in this space. And so data and AI have quickly become, a core interest for us, given the nature of the business that Microsoft does, and as well from a regulatory perspective. And that's my interest in joining this panel. And I'm really looking forward to hearing all the perspectives.
Fantastic. And I just by giving that introduction, I'm in terms of how Microsoft thinks about these things globally and how you think about applying this locally and what kind of feedback is going back and stuff. So maybe we can unpack that as well. Okay, thank you very much for that. Aretha, quick introduction from you.
Thank you, Jacques, for having me. So yes, Aretha Marie, and I'm a policy researcher. I spend most of my time working around finding ways, improving various aspects in terms of adopting the digital economy in Africa. I've worked with entrepreneurial ecosystems, particularly at Impact Abarare here in Zimbabwe. I'm based here in Zimbabwe. I've also worked with the Next Einstein Forum, and here I'm representing the Alliance for Africa's Intelligence, where I help out as the Policy and Ethics Chair. Fantastic. Sounds great. And maybe just by way of introduction, because it's just the three of us here as well. So I've mentioned, reintroduced myself and affiliate the things that I'm involved in. But just quickly, so I did my PhD in AI machine learning way back.
I'm based here in Cape Town, so you're from Zimbabwe. So we actually kind of here from Southern Africa, representing Africa. So yeah, my background is started academic. My focus was really on machine learning, AI, and then applications. And after my university stint, where I've applied AI in various industries, chemical engineering and business school, and we built neural network models of brain disorders. I also authored a book called Neural Networks and Psychopathology. We'll be talking about all these kind of things. But then I went into business and I founded Cortex Logic, Season Systems, which was and eventually I sold that company, General Electric, in 2011. So that was 14 years spending time around the globe, selling these kind of solutions that we've built on top of our AI engine at that time. And it was incredible experience to see how AI can be applied. And at that time, there was not a lot of AI companies really, and we were the first AI company, as I mentioned, that sold to a multinational from Africa in the space. But it was fascinating period, and then after that, I spent some time at GE, spent some time at Jumo, and to conclude. My current focus is Cortex Logic, AI engine for business, part of the Cortex group, and we've transformed that business into a scalable platform business for wellness, and we're focusing on health wellness, where we're looking at things like chronic lifestyle diseases, mental health, nutrition, diet, all of those kind of things, and help people become well. So it's about improving wellness for all, and then secondly, also looking at financial wellness. So it touches a bit about financial inclusion and helping people on that front as well. Anyway, so without further ado, let's get into the issues. So we're going to talk about addressing hurdles to AI adoption in Africa. And I know we all share, we don't want Africa to be left behind. We realize that AI is a disruptive force. And I know both of you being involved in the AI space in various areas, you're very aware of that. Otilia, you're very aware of what Microsoft is doing, and as a big player in this space globally. But there's some other big players, Google and Facebook, and there's a number of players, AWS, everybody's pretty much, all the tech players are active in the space. In Asia, we see a lot of stuff there. So there is a concern that we don't want Africa to be left behind. So it's back to leaders and thought leaders here in Africa to help here with the change and the adoption of AI. So let's start with Otilia. So let's just quickly talk about the issues and objections to AI adoption. So let's just unpack it before we talk about objections, because that's maybe something different as well. If we just talk about just the issues of AI adoption, so what is preventing us from adopting AI at scale and implementing AI at scale on the African continent from your perspective? Now, Rita, I'm going to ask you the same question. So, Otilia, let's start with you.
Okay, yeah, this is a big one. Yeah. I think part of it is probably a lack of understanding or awareness of the potential of AI as a technology. And so for practitioners in the space, there's a little bit of a responsibility in helping people understand the possibilities. This is a tool, but you kind of need to ignite in people the feeling of this is a tool and this is how you might use it. So on the one end, there's that. On the other, there's also perhaps infrastructure problems, and this is one that we've all, collectively discussed before, at least as we're preparing for this panel. And this is not just an issue of cloud computing capabilities, right? Because we have these type of technologies now available on the continent. I think it's actually an infrastructure issue when you think about access to power, access to internet or connectivity, particularly to the last mile. Not just in the urban areas or in the cities. If you really want to harness the power of what AI can do on the continent, some of the problems it can solve, it's really to solve for those people who are probably the most vulnerable in our communities. And those people currently likely don't have access to power or to connectivity in the way that they should, for them to be able to then enjoy the benefits of a technology like AI. So I think there's a little bit of a digital divide or gap when it comes to infrastructure. And I think there's also a need to raise awareness, at least on the possibilities that are available with this technology.
Yep, absolutely. Aretha, what do you think?
Yeah, so I do agree with what Otilia has just said, but just maybe to add on to what she was saying concerning infrastructure, because I think it's the big elephant in the room. So in terms of infrastructure, when we are talking about AI, we can talk about the basic and the digital infrastructure, but we also have to look at sector-specific infrastructure. So for example, if you're looking at the health sector, there's need for electronic health records, and that's a whole lot of investment that needs to be done in that area. So I think we have to look at when we're looking at the basic infrastructure, the digital infrastructure, and then the sector-specific infrastructure. And then I just want to also highlight some non-technical hindrances towards AI adoption. I think it's very important also to bring that out. So one of the issues is around cultural lags. So you find that in some communities, from a very young age, children grow up interacting with technology. And then here in Africa, you have to start adopting it at a later stage in life. So those are issues that need unpacking, that need to be understood. And I'm talking, especially if we're having to talk about the use of AI devices in medical care or robotics, for example. And then other issues that I want to highlight is also the issue of competing priorities. Yeah. So most of the times when you're talking about these issues, it seems like it's something that's like a pie in the air.
So, pie in the sky.
Yeah, a pie in the sky. So you'll be asked, like, what we have other priorities that we need to be looking at. So I think there's also need to talk about the role of technology, and especially emerging technologies in development, and involving policymakers in that regard. And of course, I want to also go back to other technical aspects as well. When we're looking at the costs that are associated with using these technologies or acquiring these technologies. And then I think one of the issues is also our main educational institutions. They're lagging behind. They're only like starting now to incorporate AI programs and courses in their programs. But you find that there are also, you were talking about it earlier on, initiatives that are already happening, self-organized or run by private players that are trying to train students on machine learning, for example, the AIMS one, and also the Machine Institute. So data science for Africa. So I think those are the ones that I'll mention just now, and then as we go on, we can also add on.
Oh, there's so many things to unpack in terms of issues. Yeah. And I think you both touched on the core things here. And I think it's also very fragmented. If I just quickly give my input here, I just give you an example. So obviously here in South Africa, you see quite a bit of activity. We do have some successful AI companies that exited before. We're building some, hopefully, unicorns. We need those kind of examples here in Africa. I'm right in the middle of some of these kind of entrepreneurial stuff, which is great. But there's some great examples. I know Kenya, and I've got a colleague of mine that's also on the Machine Intelligence Institute of Africa, John Kamara. He's also based in Nairobi. That's doing some awesome stuff with AfriRecord and healthcare in that space. He's a director also in MIA. But then another guy is Bayo Andenkanbi. He's the Chief Transformational Officer of MTN, in Nigeria, and he founded Data Science Nigeria. And they are setting an example for the continent, for other nations on the African continent in terms of how to build the ecosystem. And they want to get 1 million people trained in I think 10 years or so. They are busy with, they call it the AI plus knowledge box, where this is my example in terms of AI adoption as well. So if people don't have access to the internet, what they do is they put it all in a box digitally, all the courses and books and stuff, and then just make it available. And they've got free downloads of their AI starter booklet. And they've got also a little booklet that they put together for kids. It's amazing, and they make it available. So it's a wonderful initiative. So that's why I say it's fragmented. So when I see these kind of things, I get inspired, because they're helping us we're building towards something, to building towards adoption, when we're kind of addressing these hurdles by doing things like this. And Otilia, you mentioned the educational part, so they're definitely tackling that. And if you think about infrastructure, they're trying to go through various mechanisms, even if there's internet access issues, trying to come up with solutions. And that's probably what's going to be needed. And we probably need to do this at scale. So it's fascinating. The one thing, Aretha, you also mentioned was that universities are lagging, and some of the institutions, and even yet, University of Stellenbosch, it's only recently that they put a data science school, or school for data science and computational thinking, and it's only recently that things were happening. It was kind of very interesting. When I founded MIA, the Machine Intelligence Institute of Africa, it was like the Wild West. It was just, nobody's doing anything here. There's no conferences, there's nothing. That was 2016. And then suddenly, and it was kind of an explosion after that. So it was wonderful to see. And I got inspired by some of the African leadership at the World Economic Forum that were talking about these kind of things as well. So anyway, long stories. I want to, so I think wonderful input. So thanks for that. We obviously, there's more things to unpack in terms of ideas, and I would love to brainstorm as well. What kind of things can we do to address some of these issues? So maybe before I get to objections, let's just see if there's any ideas, and doesn't need to be in any order, and you can come in as well. How can we, I've just given some examples of how, from an educational perspective, how we can try to bridge the gap. But we still talk about cost, and we still talk about, I think, Aretha, you talked about devices, you talked about electronic health records. We are kind of addressing, that's kind of a mess, that's true, but there are ways of seeding the system and making cheaper devices available. And you get, obviously, cheaper phones. You don't need to have smartphones. Smartphones are getting cheaper as well. Feature phones, Jumo's work with feature phones to get financial inclusion going. So what would you say, what are the things that we can do to address some of these issues? Any ideas on any front? We mentioned a number of issues, but what kind of ideas do you have on that front?
Okay, so in terms of education, I've also worked with training coding to young women and girls. So I think one thing that we need to also be looking at is, when we're doing these initiatives or this curriculum redesign, we need also to focus not just on building competencies, but moving to advanced competencies, and not ending there, but also looking at addressing the areas of building competitiveness. So we also want, we don't just want to build competence and there are no jobs. So it's something that I think, as we are focusing on building educational skills, we need to also emphasize the issue of job creation, so that when the students come out of school, there's somewhere to go. Otherwise, we end up in that cycle where we have excellent skills, but then they go and work elsewhere instead of building here in Africa. So it's one of the areas that I think we need to be really looking at.
Yeah, very important, that one. Just before, Otilia, before you just come in there, obviously In my presentation, by the way, that I recorded on yesterday, sorry, when was it? Friday. I talked about AI initiatives to transform Africa. And there's a number of things that I've unpacked there. And I also talked about the future of work and how we need to look at redesigning society and economy. And we need to think about creating or valuing specific types of jobs that's in collaboration with smart technology like AI as well, where we need to start focusing more on compassionate, human-centric services, for instance, that we value in terms of health, education, keep looking after the elderly, anything that uplifts society. We need to place value on that and reward that in a proper way. So there's, I think, and maybe there's the opportunity for Africa, given that we need to leapfrog, is to just say, can we redefine the whole dynamics? Obviously, we need to work in a world economy, but is there smart ways of re-engineering society and economy where we focusing on the right things as well? So that is a big topic that you just touched on in terms of future of work and things like that. But okay, but let's just quickly, Otilia, let's just stay disciplined on the issues and how we can solve it. Any ideas? I know Microsoft has got thinking big in terms of these kind of things as well. So how do you think about, there's many issues here. So obviously you coming from a legal point of view as well, there's so many other things that you can think about from that perspective. How can we remove things? How can we make it easier to implement AI solutions within our environment? But anyway, I want to give you the opportunity to talk about how we can address issues.
Okay, but maybe just building on the conversation that we started around skills. The one thing that Microsoft is doing, and this was also then now kind of scaled up in light of COVID and realizing that the jobs issue then becomes even more pertinent and skills becomes even more important for countries to reskill or upskill people to make them employable during this time where also we're losing traditional jobs. It's in this instance. So one of the initiatives that Microsoft is working on, I know others are doing the same. So when I speak of Microsoft, it's just to give an example. It's not to tout we're doing the best. But we do have we recently announced a global skills program, and we're making these skilling programs available globally, free of charge, and working with governments to implement them as part of their part of their country agenda, if it's something that's actually of interest. And so we've seen the likes of Nigeria pick it up. They actually recently announced this together with the African Development Bank. They're calling it Digital Nigeria, and they've set up a website and people can log on and actually do a lot of these courses in emerging technologies, which is a great initiative. And I think our competitors are doing the same. I think there's a great opportunity to not just wait for educational institutions to set up programs or wait for specialized programs, but there's a great opportunity for private sector to really support the government in this space. That's one area. In the area of connectivity, we've seen some very interesting things. And I know I spoke about it as an issue before. Yes, it is an issue, but we're also seeing innovation. And that's the great thing about technology, right? Is that we've seen the likes of it's called TV white spaces. This is the use of what was traditionally spectrum used for broadcasting, which is then being used to provide broadband or connectivity in the last mile. Because in a lot of our countries, there would already have been a lot of investment made in infrastructure around broadcasting, and yet a lot of that is not being used anymore for obvious reasons as things have changed. And so there's a great opportunity to repurpose that spectrum. And we've seen governments in a lot of countries actually accelerate legislation that allows the use of the spectrum because they've seen that it's actually beneficial for them. We've seen that here in Kenya, we've seen it in Ghana, and other places as well. So there's an opportunity as well for technology players to innovate around how they extend connectivity, not to just wait for the telecoms operators to invest, because it's capital intensive. You can't, isn't it? It does take a lot of money, isn't, to that cost element that Aretha spoke to. When we think about the cost of the technologies, I think it's one of those things. It's almost catch-22, right? The more you use it, the more scale you have, it will push down the price.
That's right.
My home ground is that I am a commercial person at the end of the day, right? I like to think in numbers. But if we're able to reach the level of scale that will push down, it will help push down the cost. It's the way that mobile phone penetration, if you think of how that has happened and how that has also pushed down the pricing over time, and now mobile phones are quite affordable, really. As in, you can get a mobile phone for under $20 even. I worked in the mobile phone space before I moved to Microsoft, hence all this. So I think there's an opportunity as well for us to think about how do we leverage this at a scale that can then give us the benefits, the economies of scale that will make the pricing make sense for us. And when I think of the type of government initiatives that they could do leveraging AI, those are the type of scale of projects that can really kind of create that economies of scale. Yeah, those are maybe the top 3 things that I have top of mind, just as in some of the ways that some of the ideas and how we can solve for that. There's the interesting question that you've raised, Aretha, around the digitization of healthcare records. And I think that was just an example, because I think the point isn't what I was getting, the core point that you were making there is, for you to be able to do all the cool stuff that AI does, you do need to have the information in digital format. As in, the information needs to be, as simple as that, right? And so there's a lot of work, I guess, to digitize a lot of our records, not just in healthcare. I imagine it's in every industry there is. I think even something as simple as lawyers or legal practice, interesting enough, there are people who still use a lot of paper and still have file rooms. You walk in and they have a hard copy file of your file. And so there's still a lot of work to do around digitally transforming our industries before we can really see the full benefits of AI. But I don't know how to solve for that.
No, it's that, Otilia, that is I want to actually comment quickly, and I fully agree. This is wonderful input. Just before we get to the next question, just also want to chip in on the specifically talking about the issues, and how do we address that. So just quickly, let's talk about the how do you create those digital records and stuff. So I think what we specifically do in terms of this journey wellness application that we created. So instead of having paper-based forms that people fill in, so clearly that needs to be digitized, so it's immediately captured and stuff. So what we do as part of this wellness play, we do a health risk assessment that's immediately captured on your phone digitally. And the moment they've entered that data, it takes 7 minutes to answer. It's done like a Survey Monkey type of thing, very quickly, but it's completely embedded. It's part of the app. You just fill it in. Immediately after that, it calculates a wellness, it gives you an overall wellness score. It looks at your heart health risk based on the information that you've provided there. There's obviously biometric information that a nurse or a person that's helping to facilitate this can also help to capture and get that information in the system. But it's all in one go, very quickly. Assessing your mental health, there's things like PHQ-9 international standards in terms of depression and things like anxiety. There's things like basic questions in terms of lifestyle. And if you ask the right questions, you get that information. And then we use that to provide a wellness score. We've got various indices that use standard international standards. But then you provide that immediately back to the people. They see immediately there's a dashboard. Connected with this is an intelligent virtual assistant that start talking to them about these topics, nutrition and wellness and stuff. And as they engage, we get information, the user interaction. So there are ways of getting to seed the system and get the thing going. And then we start give push notifications, give advice, and we just get the ball rolling. I mean, there's a bunch of other things around that, but that's an example of where you almost just facilitate, get the data. And that's what's happening with wearables. We're obviously connecting to wearable data. And if not everyone in Africa is going to have smart watches and Fitbits and Garmins and all of those kind of things. So you cater for a smaller market there, but still, hopefully this will become more cost effective. And this is then real-time data coming into the Microsoft Cloud, Apple apps, all these kind of AWS and so forth. And there's the Samsungs and the Garmins and the Huaweis and all of this, and you can utilize that information to provide better advice and better guidance and better nudging and stuff like that. So I think we're clearly on that track, independent of what Africa is doing. So we got to think about how can we leapfrog and come up with smart solutions around this. But you are 100% right. If you think about legacy systems, where there's the actual medical records and stuff like that, and MRIs and all of those kind of things, how do you get that data? It's very fragmented and siloed and stuff. So you can maybe start seeding, but there are that problem. So that is a real problem. The other quick comment that I want to make about issues solving with the Machine Intelligence Institute of Africa, one of the things that we talked about training at scale, we got to think about how do we train at scale. How do we get more Africans empowered and let them know about all these kind of tools? And there's so many tools available. And I'm so glad about what Google is doing with Google DeepMind and Indaba and Microsoft investment and AWS. All these big tech players are playing a big role. And Facebook is, and all these companies, they've got good intentions. And they realize that we need to this digital divide, we got to solve this problem. And also coming up with more cost-effective solutions themselves, internet, what Elon Musk is doing, especially with SpaceX and Starlink. Facebook is trying to get these balloons up, and I love these kind of initiatives. We need more of that. But what I also thought about, education needs to be disrupted. And we know that Aretha, you mentioned that it takes too. Why are they always lagging, universities? So can't we have more like this entrepreneurial spirit that you have with startups and tech businesses where we move things forward quicker? We need to be agile around this. So I was thinking one of the things that we suggest is certification and accreditation of AI-related learning courses and practical experience and skills on an individual level, but that you acknowledge not just formal education, but even if they've read something on Wikipedia, they grasp it. If they've done this YouTube video, if they do this work at this startup or this business, that all of that kind of material, that you accredit them for that, and that you acknowledge that and certify. So I think we need to leapfrog here. So one of the things that Mia is suggesting, an innovative thing, is can we be innovative in terms of certification accreditation, as we do training in all sorts of ways. So we obviously we welcome Microsoft doing all these wonderful things. We know there's lots of MOOCs out there. There's YouTube. Can we do better guidance with all the material that's out there? Anyway, so I just wanted to mention that. So I think between what we've just discussed here, there are issues, but there are some solutions to some of these issues. So that brings me to the next question. And I see we've got 20 minutes, less than 20 minutes left. So objections. So what kind of objections are there here in Africa around AI adoption and implementation of AI? Anyone? Aretha?
Okay. So I think one of the first things that I want to highlight is the issue of underrepresentation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So looking at it at different aspects of it. So if we look at the number of African researchers who are involved in AI, there are very few. If we look at the number of enterprises compared to the rest of the world who are based in Africa, who are also involved in AI, they're also very few. I remember coming across some stats that say 95% of all the worldwide AI enterprises, they're hosted in only 20 countries, and none of those are in Africa. And you also look at, in terms of research output worldwide, only 2% is from Africa. So there are a number of issues then in terms of the AI that is being built. So it's kind of like foreign. There's no that much input from here in Africa. And then that leads to the issue of inequalities, that we already have societal inequalities, and it seems like the AI technologies are just coming to exacerbate these inequalities if there's no intervention, because of they're prone to bias, whether it's gender, whether it's race, or it's culture. So those are some of the issues. And the other one is also to do with structural discrimination and exploitation. And here I want to highlight, particularly giving an example in the gig economy. You know that the gig workers receive their rating using algorithms which are not transparent. And you have issues, especially with the COVID pandemic, that workers have to work very long hours. They end up forcing themselves to work where it's very risky, I mean, health-wise, because they need to earn more. So those are some of the things that are being highlighted, and some of the objections around AI, and various other ethical issues. So we can also continue to talk about more, but I'll just end here for now.
That's great. Otilia, what's your perspective on objections? What kind of objections have you heard? I'm sure Microsoft heard some objections in general as well.
And I think it is, you really set out, you know, a lot of the key objections are ethical in nature, as in they stem from, there's some outcomes that we perhaps are unintended or unintentional, but are outcomes of the use of AI that may have negative impact on society. So there's objections from that perspective. The other big one that we're seeing is with the rise in data protection regulations, or the rise in conversations around privacy, there is a reluctance to have these volumes of data processed. So people are still trying to figure out, I mean, if we're going to be churning out these volumes and volumes of data that can then be used to create algorithms that then are able to, you know, either create some outcomes or otherwise, we're losing control, right? Yeah. And so maybe one way that we can do that is by controlling our data. Listen, so I want to keep my data resident, or I want to, you know, no one should be able to access my data. We're seeing those type of objections, and it's understandable. Because on the other end, we've seen use cases, even not just from a private sector, but from state actors, leveraging this data and AI, the combined force of the two, for outcomes that are contrary to democracy, right? Whether it's and I'll just leave it at that. Outcomes that are contrary to democracy. I won't speak too much on exactly what it is that we're seeing. And so you see objections around that as well, because there's a little bit of a feeling of, you know what, this can actually be used as a tool by negative actors, including states. Oh, yes. So there's a reluctance of, as whether as a data subject or even as technology players, as in how do we solve this? We're trying to figure out, how do we solve this technology and make sure that it then isn't used for purposes that wouldn't support, that would be in compliance with the law, one, or would not support democracy or otherwise. So we're figuring out the ethics of, ensuring there's enough representation, like you said, within all those things. We're also trying to figure out, okay, how do we also ensure that we're not, this technology doesn't land in the wrong hands? Yeah.
Oh man, Otilia and Aretha, fantastic inputs on that front. Man, I think we need wisdom as Homo sapiens to use these kind of powerful tools in the right manner. With great power comes great responsibility. Who said that? It was a Spider-Man. But it's absolutely true, and I'm also concerned about that. I'm actually writing a book right now on transformative human-centric artificial intelligence, and I'm busy with a chapter on this. We'll be talking about governments, the AI's impact on public and society, on governments, on public sector. And we've got a huge responsibility. I see some good, I know there's the partnerships in AI, and Microsoft's also participating on that. There's lots of initiatives that talks about the ethical aspects. But I think as citizens as well, we don't want a digital dictatorship, because that will be very bad. And then we were trying to fight my massive transformative purpose is how to shape a better future in the smart technology era. How can we, and in Africa, how can we transform Africa as well? So we don't want Africa to be left behind, but we want a better future for Africans, for the world, for Homo sapiens. And a lot of the problems that we have to solve is not just national, it's global. So we got to think about the big picture. And it is not good for the world to also have a lagging continent as well. So it's good. So it's almost like your body. It doesn't have my arm or it's got cancer, or I'm struggling and I can't. Well, it's going to affect everything. So it's so important that I think Africans need to take responsibility. Aretha, you mentioned something interesting around the research. Before I started my first AI company, I was a researcher at Stellenbosch University and in AI. I was focusing on recurrent neural networks and stuff like that. And if I didn't go into a business, I would have probably done that. But I still did a lot of research. But I think there's one thing about quality and quantity. I think there's a lot of breakthroughs in AI where we can take AI to the next level in terms of truly understanding meaning and stuff. And I would love personally to be involved in making contributions on that front and try to get best brains here in Africa so one can do some really quality research, because it's not just about quantity. There's lots of papers being published. I know that game. I've done that. So it's about, can we make significant contributions that's moving the needle? And I think there is opportunities, and we shouldn't worry too much about playing the games around these things. Can we make contributions that's making a difference here on the application front? But I think there's also opportunities on the research front that I'm quite excited about. But anyway, I'm sure we can dig into that quite a bit. I wanted to ask quickly, Otilia, just quickly in terms of, before we run out of time, because I wanted to just ask about Microsoft in terms of how the dynamics work in terms of ethics and just policies and sharing between continents and what's happening on that front. Are there lots of feedback from a legal perspective? What's working here? You're trying to work things back. Just interested about that dynamic as well.
Like many of our counterparts, technology players, we've released what we're holding ourselves accountable to. In the absence of express regulation in this space, we do want to be governed by some sort of standard.
Yes.
And so we've released what we call our responsible AI principles from a Microsoft perspective, which look very similar to what Google has and what others have as well, as part of the partnership and as an alliance in AI. That's on the one end. The second end, from an ethics perspective, we've actually set up an ethics board, as in it's called ETHA, as in AI and ethics. Okay, I can't remember the exact the abbreviation now, but they actually review sensitive use cases of AI. So if there's any potential application that we're considering in any country across the world, this is all kind of channeled through an ethics board that actually review this from a 360 view. And this teams include legal teams, business people, policy teams, as well, people who think about things from a compliance perspective. And so that's kind of become the center of governing how we, sell these technologies in this space. And then from a sharing best practices across the globe, our government affairs team is really leading in this space, and they're the people who work around policy. They're supported, of course, by us as the legal professionals. Yeah. But we're kind of engaging globally in the different markets where we are actually present as Microsoft, advocating for the adoption of some sort of policy around AI and ethics. We have had some positive success at least in the Middle East and African region in Jordan, and we hope they will soon actually have a policy in place. And we're taking those learnings and trying to replicate in other markets as well across the continent. And so that's what that at least that global footprint allows us to be able to take best practices when we've landed something and replicate it elsewhere if there's an interest. But yeah.
Wow,
yeah.
No, that's amazing. I've got. It's just wonderful to tap into that thought leadership, and then well, it's a lovely channel. And in fact, you're sitting here and you can disseminate that. So that's awesome. In the last few minutes, it looks like we're using all our time. We don't need another panelist. We're enough. I just want to say, the South Africa, I know each of the countries are looking at national strategies around AI and the fourth industrial revolution. I'd like to call it the smart technology era. There's a report out from South Africa around the key recommendations in terms of the fourth industrial revolution. And I just quickly want to mention this, and I want to just get a question out of this specifically as well. It touches on policy and open data as well. But what was interesting around the key recommendations, invest in human capital was the first one. So do you agree with that? That is a key thing. We know that. So secondly, they were saying establishing an AI institute. Okay, we do have some institutes and various things, but the more the merrier, I would say. Bring it on. Establish a platform for advanced manufacturing and new materials was one. Secure and avail data to enable innovation. So that's a big one. So how can we access data? So I'm going to have a question on that. Just want to mention the other ones. Incentivize future industries, platforms, applications of fourth industrial technologies, build the infrastructure for fourth industrial revolution. We probably talk about 5G, all these kind of things as well. And I'm sure there's all sorts of opinions on that, but that would generate data at scale as well. And then another one was, the seventh one was review and amend or create policy and legislation. I know both of you are right in there. And then the fourth one is establishing a strategy, fourth industrial revolution strategy implementation coordination council. Anyway, so let's just quickly touch on, I want to talk about open data as well. In here South Africa, I was participating on that front, and we had some leadership also thought leadership from Europe that was talking about those kind of things. And the other thing is policy and legislation and where we are. So if you just want to comment, both of you, given that you're in this space, just around both those topics in the last few minutes, open data as well as this policy creation and where we are with those kind of things. Aretha.
Okay, so in terms of open data, I think that is very, very key, and especially availing it for free and for research purposes. And I know there are issues around data extraction for personal gain, and it's a whole lot of debate around availing data for free, but then it's then used for commercial gain. It's an issue that needs tackling. And I think also the issue of representation that I brought in earlier on, that there are other data sets that are available that researchers or entrepreneurs, innovators can use, but most of the data is not fully representative of Africa. So it's something that we still need to work on, availing the data in a usable format. And I think one key area is the issue of data interoperability, and also the issue of data exchange, being able to share data across portals. Yeah, and I think that also touches on regulation, like data standardization and all those issues. So that I think data is a pillar on its own that needs to be unpegged in a session on its own, because it touches on various aspects. But it's very, very key that we have data in a usable format and available for use.
Absolutely. Great stuff. Otilia.
Great points there. And interesting enough, we've also been engaged in this space. It's a key policy area for us around open data, because there's such a huge potential for cross-industry, cross-sector collaboration to really get the most value out of data if we're actually able to share it, as you say, free and in a usable format. We've also seen governments have, set up open data initiatives. Similarly in Kenya, as you've mentioned in South Africa, the government does have an open data initiative that I think it's just perhaps scaling it up and actually finding the use cases where they can test out this framework has actually been the thing that has delayed. We're exploring it in the space of there's an agriculture project we're working on with the Ministry of Agriculture here locally, and at least that data is a little bit low in sensitivity because it's agricultural data, versus let's say healthcare or other more sensitive types of data. And so they're exploring kind of creating an open data platform for agriculture. Let's see where that goes. And we're seeing a couple of different examples of that as well in the region and in other countries. So I think there is an awakening to the fact that there is opportunity. As Aretha said, if we can get this data free for use and in an easily usable way, but we need the test cases, right? Use cases that then can, because regulation will always lag behind innovation. We can't expect the regulators to go advance. We do need to kind of do some proof of concept, show them what the value is, what's possible, and then they can create the guardrails. And so, yeah, I'm all for let's go out and experiment with some of these use cases and kind of make the case for policy.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Great inputs there. It looks like it's close to the top of the hour, so we have to conclude with this. But I want to thank both of you, Aretha, Otilia, wonderful inputs. It was really fantastic talking to you. I would love to listen to this again. But fantastic. I want to wish you also the best for the day, the week, etc. And looking forward to catch up soon at the conference virtually. Well, actually, yep, when we join it. But thank you very much for your participation here. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Jay.
Well done.